We thought it'd be fun to finish off this season with a conversation among our writers on stage. Sort of, it'll be a little bit like reality television. You know, they'll pretend they're just talking in their little bubble, and we'll watch. I think we're going to go with 3 questions. Okay, they're very broad, and then at the end, time permitting, maybe they could take some questions from the audience as well. Does that sound okay? All right. So the first question I have for you 3 is, what writers have been a major influence on you and your work? Peter, let's start with you.
So William Carlos Williams and the Black Mountain Poets, all through my 20s. Robert Creeley, Denise Levertov, and also Marion Moore, all through my 20s and early 30s. But then that expanded in my early 30s to a wide pantheon of great poets, right? About 50 other people. But they were the people that really got me reading.
How about you, Anita? Originally, for me, it was the confessional poets, the American confessional poets, particularly Anne Sexton, John Barrymouth, and to some extent, Sylvia Plath, of course. However, as I developed more as a poet, like that would have been more in my early 20s, and as I developed more as a poet, it would have gone more to some of the sort of quintessential Canadian writers. I think one of the books that had the greatest effect on me was actually a novel, and that was Michael Ondaatje's Coming Through Slaughter, when I realized where that nexus point could happen between the lyric poem and a structured story, and that had huge bearing for me going forward. That said, that's all kind of influenced how I write stylistically, but in considering how writers have influenced me, it's been the one-on-one individual writers that has actually influenced not only my poetry and how I continue, but the fact that I continue. John Lavery, who was a fantastic fiction writer and who passed away a couple of years ago, definitely read his books if you haven't yet. Especially You Kwasniewski, You Piss Me Off, a fantastic book. He was a great guy, and every time I saw him at a reading, he would come sit next to me and he would say, "So Anita, what are you working on now?" And every time I think of not writing, of skipping a project, of taking a break, I hear John Lavery in my head saying, "What are you working on now?" And I figure I don't have the right to stop.
How about you, Mike?
I find that I'm still I'm influenced by whichever poet I've most recently read. So it's whoever I'm reading at the time tends to come out in what I write. And it's difficult, the question of influence, I find, because I'm not sure that I grasp entirely what I'm reading all the time or how it's coming out in the writing. But there are a few poets that I find really interesting. Probably the first major writer that I got into was Derek Walcott, for his ability to write about to write beautiful lyrical poetry, but also full of ideas and history, and to bring all those things together. So he would be one, for example. Others that I've been reading and appreciating a lot are Joseph Brodsky, and closer to home, I really enjoyed Suzanne Buffum's last book, The Irrationalist. The kind of blend between poetic writing and this lyricism and a poetry of ideas seems to be kind of resonating.
All right, great. So I think everyone can hear me here. So the other, and this is probably going to generate a lot of questions from the audience. All 3 of these questions, but the next one I have is, what challenges do you face in your writing, so I'm thinking when you're sitting alone trying to work, are there certain challenges that you're aware of or walls you come up against, and how do you get around them? Peter?
Yeah, just keeping going is tough sometimes until you've worked up enough bottlenecks to where you have maybe 4 poems that are coming along, and then you feel great, it's all wonderful. But until that happens, you know, you're up against just getting past the bottlenecks, that is, poems that don't build through. So for me, here's one of the things that I find hard. It's not to repeat tics, not to repeat stylistic mannerisms, okay? Try to avoid my pet words and one of the amazing poets for avoiding those things was Elizabeth Bishop. She almost never repeated herself. So she's kind of a model. She's one of my models, you know. And there was something else I wanted to say, but it's flown.
Maybe it'll come back.
Yeah.
Mike, how about you?
Yeah, repetition, sounding like I'm writing the same poem over and over again. That's something I am aware of and don't want to do. Sitting still, I find sitting in a chair difficult, especially I work in an office, and so that's, I spend too much time in the chair as it is, and that's tough, fatigue. Pretty obvious things so far, but yeah, maybe a few.
Okay, Anita?
Time. Absolutely time. There's the idea that you have to make choices, and this is a choice. You choose to make art. You choose to create. You know, Neil Gaiman gave this wonderful valedictorian speech. I don't know if anybody ever saw it. YouTube it for sure. At I think it was Oxford, and he said, "Whatever you do, make good art." You know, if you get out of the shower, you make good art. If you, whatever you're doing in your life, if someone dies, make good art. It's what you need to do, and that is a choice. And I think it's a choice that's very hard, and I don't want to be sexist, but I think it's a choice that's very hard for women to make. I think that choosing to be selfish enough to make art instead of anything else is very difficult. My garden's gone to hell. It's a jungle back there. I bought a house 2 years ago. I gave it a shot for 2 months. And you know, I had dreams, I had visions. It was going to be like really amazing. It was going to be like so gorgeous. And it's not.
And you blame poetry for that.
I blame poetry for that. And I was giving a tour of the backyard to a friend who hadn't been to the house before, and she said, "Well, yeah, but you know, every time you think you could be growing flowers, you've got to think you're making poems instead." And it comes down to that. You have to be okay with instead. And I think that's the biggest obstacle for me for writing poetry, is to choose to do it instead. But it's what I do. It's what I'm drawn to. It's what I love. It's hopefully what I'm good at. So I have to be okay with doing it instead.
Well, that's a great segue to my final question that I'll throw at you. You can address it again, Anita, and that is simply, why do you write poetry? Peter?
Why do I write? Oh,
You knew I was
going to ask this. I did want to repeat. I did want to answer what I forgot, which was love and death and sex. So those are things that you can. Those are good things to return to. And it's okay to keep treating those subjects, and you know, it's not wrong to write 5 poems about something that involved death. It's not a terrible thing. But okay, now you're asking me why I write poems.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Because
No comment.
I'm blown away. I'm really blown away with what certain combinations of sounds make in my ear. You know, I love lines. I like language down at the line level, where I think that novelists like language down at the chapter level or the page level. But I like to build up scenes, but they always wind up being in lines and 2 pages. You know? graduated from where David has got a plague. But that's okay. It's all right, you know. So there you go. That's the main reason.
All right. Anita, is there anything else you wanted to say about why you write?
I am a deeply impatient person, and to me, poetry is the closest you can come to conveying pure thought. If I could go around and just, do that psychic connection thing with people and not have to bother with words, I think words are beautiful and I love to use them and I love the sound and resonance and such, but if I could have that pure connection, I would. And to me, aside from some visual art forms, it's as close as you can come to having that purity of drawing together the idea, the moment, everything that built up to the moment, all the things that happen in thought that cannot be fully expressed comes out through poetry. There's a reason that Maya Angelou did a poem on behalf of the American public for Mandela's funeral today. When it comes down to it, when you want to convey a pure thought and emotion nexus point, you go to poetry.
Right, okay. Thinking a lot about what you just said, but Mike, I want to hear from you.
It's some similar responses. I guess part of it is why I write poetry. It's the same reason why I read poetry, which is that direct sort of communication that you get and the economy of the language. I love that. Sometimes it might not seem like it's direct, but the poem's boiled down by nature, and that just works for me on so many levels, aesthetically as well. That just get a ridiculous pleasure out of well-formed phrase, reading it or writing it, and I find that poetry does that better than any other form of literature that I've encountered.
All right. Well, lots of ideas there. I think we can open it up. Does anyone have any comments or questions about what you've heard?
Anita, shall we expect your next collection to be Planet of the Garden?
Absolutely not.
I have one. Anita, how do you reconcile the fact that you say you're impatient and you like poetry because, I don't want to rephrase what you said, but there is a elemental nature to it. It's cut through the bullshit, right? But it's very time consuming. It takes a long time to work away at. So how does that, play into your impatience? Sorry?
Well, it's still better, isn't it? I was watching a documentary the other day about this marble floor somewhere, and I don't know where it was, in Constantinople or something, and monks would spend their entire lives basically, doing this one little section of the marble floor, so you'd spend your entire life dedicated to finishing a horse's ass. So it's still more direct than that. I was being more efficient in my time than that, presumably. But that's the thing. That's making the trade-off. You still have to make that decision to do this instead of something else. And although I love the purity of the form and the ability to sort of connect as directly as possible, there's no way to look outside of the concept of time to do that. So you're just going to have to suck it up and leave the dishes.
And polishing the horse's ass is way better than the art.
You can't eat a horse's ass.
Any other questions? Comments? Yes.
Do you write while listening to music?
I don't. It bugs me to have music that's really loud or loud enough to really keep hearing. But some people love it. Julie Brooke, the poet Julie Brooke, likes listening to it.
Not possible for me. I can't have any sound.
I listen to it right before usually. I'll go and I'll listen to 20 minutes of Nina Simone or Billie Holiday or something, and the great artists, and then I'll go to the candidacy.
I put on the fireplace channel a lot. Can't even write to that. Yeah. Unmute.
Well, that's like a very warm note to end on. So I think we'll end it there. I'd like to thank all the open mic readers for participating tonight, as well as Peter Richardson, Anita Dolman, and Mike Caesar. And we hope to see all of you. This is a big crowd, but we'd like to see all of you back second Tuesday in January. Our first event of the new year will feature Stephen Artell, who's a local poet, along with Michael Lista, a poet, one book by Nancy Bloom, and he's a poetry editor of Walrus currently, so that should be an exciting evening. Thank